he's the God of all things, that he does any and everything exceedingly and abundantly above what we can think, and that his ways are perfect. But yet there are times that when we're thinking of things, at least for myself, I think, Lord, if you could just do this. Why am I aiming for this? He's the God of this. Why am I aiming for here? Why am I begging for the minimum that he has for my life? And so as I was studying through things, I kept seeing over and over this theme of unbelief. And I struggled. I said, Lord, I don't unbelieve. Why do you keep bringing this to my attention? I know who you are. And he said, but there's more. You don't realize it, but there is a spirit of unbelief that not just you struggle with, but I think as Americans, we all struggle with, because we've been given so much. You see miracles all over this world, and some that we're not seeing here because we're so privileged and we are so lucky to be where we are, that sometimes we don't ask for the really big things because we think we can go to the doctor. We've got food around the corner. These other countries don't have that, and God is doing these acts, church miracles daily in these countries. So bear with me. Some of the things that I'm going to go over are things we've already known, but I know that he has it for a purpose. So when I'm thinking to myself, Lord, this unbelief, I know I'm thick-headed, but you keep banging it into my head, so there's got to be a theme here. Let's dig a little deeper. Show me what you have for all of us. So I'm going to go back to Exodus from Egypt. Some quick facts. We know the story. The Israelites were rescued out of Egypt. They wandered in the desert for 40 years before they were able to enter the promised land. He had rescued them from slavery, which they had been captive to Egypt for hundreds of years. God worked miracles for the Hebrews every day. Before they even left Egypt, when the plagues happened, the Egyptians were affected, yet the Hebrews were spared. Every single one of those. Miracles. Not only did they see what he was doing to the Egyptians, they knew that he was merciful and spared them what he was doing to them. As they finally left Egypt, they came up to the sea, and the Red Sea split before them, and they walked out on dry land. Not muddy land. This is a sea, a land that had been covered in sea, and it was dry land, not muddy, sloshy land. That's something, the parting of the sea itself, but the dryness of it. And then as they got to the other side, they watched as that sea came back together and swallowed up their persecutors, their slaves, their slavery owners. When they were in the wilderness, he provided manna and water for them, right out of the rock. Every day, their needs were met. He had their provision. That list goes on and on and on. They describe it best when I was doing my study in Nehemiah. At the point of Nehemiah, the city of Jerusalem and the temple had been destroyed, and they were living in exile for about 150 years when Nehemiah was able to start rebuilding the walls. Once those walls were reassembled, Ezra led a covenant renewal ceremony, and the law was read. This is something that the people hadn't been together and actually heard for a very long time. And as a response to hearing that law, they began to worship. They began to confess their sins and remember all of God's mercies. So the verses that I picked to kind of summarize were they themselves describing their time in Exodus and in that thing. And it says this in Nehemiah 9:9-14. You saw the affliction of our fathers in Egypt and heard the cry by the Red Sea. You showed signs and wonders against Pharaoh and against all his servants and against all the people of his land. For you knew that they acted proudly against them. So you made a name for yourself as it is this day. And you divided the sea before them. So they went through the midst of the sea on dry land. And their persecutors you threw into the deep, as a stone into the mighty waters. Moreover, you led them by day with a cloudy pillar, and by night with a pillar of fire, to give them light on the road which they should travel. You came down also on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven, and gave them just ordinances, true laws, good statutes and commandments. You made known to them your holy Sabbath and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of your servant Moses. You gave them bread from heaven and their hunger. and you brought them water out of the rock for their thirst, and you told them to go in and possess the land which you had sworn to give them. But they, our fathers, acted proudly and hardened their necks and did not heed your commandments. They refused to obey, and they were not mindful of your wonders that you did. But they hardened their necks, and in their rebellion they appointed a leader to return them to their bondage. But you are God, ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abundant in kindness, and you did not forsake them. Even when they made a molded calf for themselves and said to it, "This is your God that brought you out of Egypt," and worked great provocations. Yet in your manifold mercies you did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of the cloud did not depart from them by day to lead them on the road, nor the pillar of fire by night to show them the light in the way they should go. You also gave them good spirit to instruct them, and you did not withhold your manna from their mouth, and you still gave them the water for their thirst. 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. We see that despite the disobedience and the unbelief, God was still with them. They weren't spared the consequences of their unbelief and disobedience, but God was faithful to his people, and he was merciful, providing care for his people, fulfilling his promise. In Hebrews, it declares that it was their unbelief and disobedience that caused them to wander for 40 years. It allowed for an entire generation, apart from 2 people, to pass away before they could be allowed to enter the promised land. Hebrews says it as this: "As has just been said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. Who were they that heard and rebelled? Were they not all those that Moses led out of Egypt? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies perished in the wilderness? And to whom did God swear that they would never enter rest, if not those who disobeyed?" So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. Unbelief. I can't help but think, how in the world did they have even a little bit of unbelief after all the miracles they had seen? The splitting of the sea, the walking on dry land, that daily provision. How was it possible, with all the miracles that surrounded them, they could complain? They could have any doubt that God had promised them and that he could fulfill it. However, the truth is, sometimes we're no better than grumbling Israelites ourselves, wandering in the desert for 40 years. We have his daily provision for ourselves. Our eyes open each morning. Our lungs are filled with his breath. We have food in our stomach, roofs over our heads. We can gather as a family of God and worship and study his word, and we can witness to those he has placed in our lives. In so many countries, you can't even do those things without being jailed or killed. This morning, I was able to hug my children, talk with my mama, pray and hold hands with my husband. Each one of those 3 things are huge personal miracles in my life that I don't want to take for granted. 11 years ago, my mom was in a coma. I was told to fly home to Arizona to say my goodbye and to make arrangements. She went into anaphylactic shock, and they said that there was nothing more they could do for her but keep her ventilated long enough to come say goodbye. Dallas and I sat in that hospital watching Mom in various machines intended to help her get any chance at recovery. We sat praying for God's mercy and healing over her. And by his faithfulness, she is here this morning with us, and I get to see her every day. 10 years ago, when I and Killian were born, they were in the NICU. The doctor called Dallas and I and told us, "You need to rush here now. I know it's not visiting hours, but you need to hurry and get here. The window to say goodbye to your little girl is very small." When we got there was fluid around her heart and her lungs, and it was increasing so much that her body was barely functioning. Her blood glasses were critical, her organs were shutting down, and she had been deprived of oxygen for far too long. Her body was swelling with all the extra fluids. They ran test after test, and even though they had not received the results, they were fairly certain it was something called hydrops fatalis. For those of us who didn't know, like I didn't, that's a very rare and serious condition that only 50% of babies even survive until birth. Half of them die in utero. And if you are able to make it to birth and live, only 20 to 30% of those that are born make it past their first year of life. That's almost 80% odds that my baby shouldn't be here today. We spent 17 days going through testing, praying, blood transfusions, intubations, central lines, ECMO. Each day and each series of days were followed by a good day and then something worse. A roller coaster of emotions, prognoses that changed minute by minute. All of them led to this critical morning when they said, "Get here now." She had been so sick the 17 days before this that we hadn't even ever been able to hold our baby girl. We spent the day praying and begging for God to intervene, to heal her, or at least let us get able to hold her. She made it through that day and then through the night. She was maintaining stats and beginning to be weaned off. And then, just as quickly as they said we have to perform emergency surgery to get her earthside, they turned around and told us, "We have no idea why, but there is zero fluid around her heart and her lungs. There is no more swelling in her body, and all of her organs are functioning within normal range." But instead of letting us rejoice in that victory, they said, "We want you to be prepared. Here's all the things she'll never be able to do, or probably not be able to do in her life because of that oxygen deprivation. She's going to have cognitive issues. She may not be able to walk or talk, believe it or not. She would have developmental delays in all of her milestones, and some of them may never even be reached. She will probably be blind. But even though we have no idea what caused all of it, and you have a very long road ahead of you, as long as her numbers stay what they are for 24 hours, you may need to go home with assistance, but you can take her home. 24 hours later, we took her home with no assistance, no feeding tube, no oxygen, a completely healthy newborn girl. And we rejoiced and we praised God because we knew He was why she was healed. Amen. He had created Ireland for a purpose, and that this was just going to be one of many testimonies in her life. His mercy in healing this morning is why I was able to hug my baby girl and watch her run off to Sunday school. 5 years ago, Dallas and I were in a completely lost marriage. It was at this point that we decided amicably that we would live in the same house as roommates simply for our children. Then God got a hold of my heart and He said, "I wanted more for your marriage than that." And so through thoughtful prayer and godly counsel, I began pursuing God to heal our marriage. I asked Him, "Can't you just fix us?" And like I think most people, I said, "Can't you fix Dallas?" Not wanting to admit that I myself was over half of that problem. And in conviction, He told me, "Why am I going to change him when you have so much to do?" And so I began praying, "God, change me. Even if you don't change Dallas, change me. Fix me. Heal me." And He was so faithful. Not only did He heal me, He brought my husband back to the Lord. He healed our marriage. And it is so much better than it was ever before it became broken. Those are just 3 huge miracles I'm reminded of every single morning, and especially this morning just getting ready for church and for this message. And after I've told you all this, why is it that I still resonate with, "Lord, I believe, I've seen it. Help my unbelief." Because it's something that still finds our way. It's not an unbelief in God. I know who He is. I've seen what He does, and I am filled with His Spirit. I feel His presence right now in this room. I felt it so overwhelmingly in prayer. I feel it at home. I feel it with my family. Every time I pick up His word or I reach out in prayer, I know that He is there. So why is it, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief"? So let's tackle that this morning. What God has been revealing and readying for us. Unbelief isn't as cut and dry as we think it is. The Israelites wandered for 40 years waiting for an entire generation of unbelief to pass away. It wasn't that they didn't know who He was. It wasn't that they hadn't seen what He'd done. It was a case of being comfortable. They got comfortable in Egypt. And being pushed out of Egypt was uncomfortable. it wasn't what they were used to. They would rather remain in bondage than be wandering in the desert because this wasn't what they had known. I think that they were fearful of freedom, fearful of uncertainty and the change that brings. And isn't that just like us sometimes? Things get scary and they get new and they're uncertain. And then they grumble and they complain. And Lord, why? Why this? Why that? And he thinks, don't you see the great work I'm doing? Can't you see where we're going? Their unsatisfied spirit and their doubt and their unbelief led them to wandering for 40 years. Everywhere Jesus went, he performed so many miracles. But in Matthew and in Mark, it recounts that he came to his own hometown and that there he could not do many miracles because of their unbelief. They heard the stories, the miraculous healings, the things he had done everywhere, and yet when he came home, they were too focused on, isn't that the carpenter, Mary's boy? How is it that he has this wisdom and performs remarkable miracles? I didn't catch it until this last study. They literally acknowledged his wisdom. They asked, how does he perform remarkable miracles? Not did he perform them? How did he perform them? They acknowledged this, and yet they still took offense, and they scoffed. Their unbelief came in the form of thinking, I watched him grow up. I know who he was. I know his mothers and siblings. There's no way he has divine power, even though we just acknowledged that he did do it. It was their unbelief that prevented him from doing more miracles among them. The biggest one that always gets me is Peter. It was Peter's idea to step out of the boat, to walk on the storm to the Lord. He said, Lord, if it is you, call me out to you. It wasn't Jesus who said, Peter, come on over here. No, it was Peter's very own idea. And then he stepped out of the boat, and the water held him. It wasn't until he let his surroundings and his fear and doubt cause to get in there that he began to sink. And what did Jesus say? Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Every time I read this, I'm amazed. He was literally standing on the water. He did the completely illogical, impossible thing that he himself had asked God to allow him to do, and God allowed him to actively do it. And yet, in the middle of doing it, he looked around, let logic sink in, and fear get to him, and he began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. I am so frustrated sometimes when I read that. I want to say, Peter, you're actively doing the impossible things through God. Why are you letting logic and the things around you diminish what God's doing in your life? And then I pause, and I think to myself, I'm so frustrated with Peter, because if I take Peter's name out and put Renee in there, it fits. How many times do we do that? Do we ask to be called to something? Do we step out in faith? Do we make a commitment and then look around and freak out and say, what am I doing? This is completely illogical. I can't do this. You know that God can use anyone and anything, but you tell yourself, not me. Not because you limit his abilities, but because you think you know yourself well enough that you're going to mess this up or say the wrong thing, and you're going to get in the way of what God is doing. And then you let doubt in, and we falter. We get caught up in logic, like we're going to get in God's way, instead of believing he can use me. It's not that I'm great or special, but I have his spirit, and as long as I am listening to it, praying and staying in his word, and I submit myself to his word, why wouldn't he use me? It's not that I'm special, it's that he wants to use us to accomplish his will. He calls you, he calls me, he calls all of us to do the illogical, miraculous things. Miracles that defy logic, surpass the laws of nature, things that can only be done by God himself. But he needs us to believe that he wants to use us for those things to happen. When I think of the most amazing, mind-boggling miracles in the Bible, I think, was it logical to march around the walls of Jericho for 6 days once a day? And then on the seventh day, walk 7 times and shout and think that these amazing fortified walls are just going to fall down? Absolutely not logical. 100% happened because of God. Was it logical to think that Jesus spitting into the ground and making mud and place it on the blind man's eyes and telling him to go wash, that he would be healed? I gotta say, if it was anyone but Jesus, I'd still be doubting it. But because it was Jesus who did it, I'm like, sure it can happen. Why not any one of us? He tells us that he can use any one of us, and he's going to do it for greater things than even he did. Not because we're seeking these miraculous things, but because of who he is and who he wants to touch. In Matthew, he sent the 12 apostles out, empowering them, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out the demons. But it didn't just stop with the apostles. He said, you will be filled with my spirit. Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and even greater than these, because I'm going to the Father. Do we actually believe that sometimes? There were miracles day after day. There wasn't any hesitancy when Peter and John were asked by the man at the gate of the city called Beautiful for alms. Without hesitation or thought, Peter said, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give to thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. Problem is, I'd never feel confident enough to do that. Not because he can't do it, because what if it doesn't happen? What if God's plan was for the situation to continue a little longer? What if my speech causes them to falter in their belief? What if I claim deliverance, yet I still struggle with temptation? The thing that tempted us is still tempting us. So we begin to say, am I really delivered? Yes. The fact is, we're no longer slaves to sin. We have the power to choose not to indulge. We have the power to flee from that temptation. And we must be diligent to show ourselves approved. That doesn't mean we're not delivered because there's temptation. There's always going to be temptations. It's that we have the power of Jesus in us to walk away from it, that we're delivered. So what if God's plan for healing isn't for right now? Maybe this is just my thorn in the flesh. Let's get personal for a second. When they told me that my kidney can never be healed and that the only way to heal my body was a transplant, the first thing I did was pray for a kidney for that transplant. I began to pray, God, don't let the numbers get any worse so I have to get dialysis. And then I think to myself, why was my first instinct not for God to heal my kidney completely? Why did I do what the doctor said had to be done? Why didn't I say, Jesus, you knit me together perfectly. I know you can do it again. It's that stinking thinking. What if he doesn't do it? What if his plan for healing comes in the form of transplant? That's far more logical. What if his plan was to use my kidney's failure to alert those who tested to be able to donate of their own medical issues? What if that was the plan for all of this? What if his healing isn't to be healing me this side of heaven? What if when I prayed, God, whatever it takes for my family and friends who were struggling and to be all in to commit to you, what if me leaving this earth and him healing me on the other side is what it takes? What if losing their mother, their sister, their friend is what it takes? And the next thing I know, I find myself saying, if that's your plan, God, I'm okay with it. And I am. I meant whatever it takes. But does that mean I don't pray for a complete healing in that kidney? Does that mean I don't declare a complete healing in that kidney? No. But I let those thoughts convince me that maybe if I just reach for this instead of this, he'll honor this. He doesn't want us to settle for this. He wants us to go from this. That's what unbelief does. I went from thinking I should declare, pray, and believe in a total healing without transplant, without dialysis, to boggle the minds of doctors, many doctors who have seen me. Instead of praying for what could be the biggest testimony in their lives, I pray for just provide a kidney, something they see all the time, something they could just say was just circumstance of you signing up for the list. There's no way they can deny when that kidney is 100% healed that it had to have been Jesus. There was nothing else that could take a genetic disease and make it whole. Are we not praying for certain things because they seem illogical, because it seems like it would be easier to pray for something a little less big, something a little more likely, so we don't disappoint ourselves or someone else? So I told you mine, what's yours? What's the thing in your life that you're letting this world and the enemy convince you is completely illogical, or that you're not worth asking for it? Are we calling things that aren't as if they are? Do we believe and have that kind of faith? When God changed the name of Abraham to father of many, he was not a father of many, but he called him it anyway, and he stepped into that. Are we doing that? I'm not saying we need to name it and claim it. I'm not saying at all that we should command God, but we are his children, and he has made us promises, and he wants us to call for the big things. And guess what? If it doesn't happen the way you thought it was going to happen, it's because he has more. It's because his plan is bigger. His plan is better than you could think. And so if my healing doesn't come right this second through a completely transformed kidney, I know he's going to get even more glory from it. I know that he's not going to let the doctors be able to tell me it's because you signed up for some list. He's got something bigger and better planned for every single one of us in this building. And we just need to take that step of faith like Peter out onto the water. And when we're standing on it, we need to say, praise Jesus, this storm can blow. I am standing on the water because he said I could do it. God, I thank you so much for your study, for the things that you've revealed to me, and for the things that I know you were encouraging people in this room to do, God. Let us call out the biggest things, the better things, and know that you are 100% capable of it. And even when they're not happening and when we don't see it, let's live and celebrate like you have done them, because you are faithful. And even if it's not the way we think it's going to be even better, Lord. Thank you for your faithfulness, even when we're not faithful. Thank you for your provision, God, for all the little things. Let us be more aware of them. Your miracles are around us every day. And if we just keep believing and we just keep striving for more of you, we're going to see even bigger and better miracles that no one can tell us are not from you, and that the world around us who needs to see you is going to see and be brought to you. We ask these things and we declare